Hello and welcome to another video on chart calculations from the astrology practice. I want to have a look in this video the aspect doctrine of Vettius Valens. I introduced this as a calculation method because I thought it would be actually quite fun to look at your chart through the perspective of Vettius Valens and his anthology. If you would have seen Vettius Valens as an astrologer, if he was your consultant astrologer during the time that he was writing the anthology, and especially when he was writing the chapter on aspects between planets, which is book 2, section 17, he would probably make some statements about your chart. And these are not really my interpretations. They are sort of summaries based on the second book, section 17 of Vettius Valens. I'm going to choose again Prince Harry as a chart example. So I put the place and the birth time and the birth date for him here. And we can calculate his aspect doctrine as seen by Vettius Valens. What you're going to get is your actual chart, so you can follow the aspects if you put your details in here. So for Prince Harry, we have a Capricorn rising chart with Jupiter rising as well, Taurus moon, and a Virgo sun. A lot of very earthy planets, a very earthy feeling, sensation-based person, I would say, and a Scorpio Saturn mid-heaven, which is very interesting. But what we're looking at here is mainly the aspects. So we're going to consider, and this part will only consider the 5 Ptolemaic aspects in the Hellenistic era. When Vettius Valens was doing charts, they did not have any minor aspects. They only look at conjunctions, which would sometimes be called a co-presence when 2 planets are in a sign. For example, here, the Sun and Mercury, they're both in Virgo in the 9th house. They are co-present in Virgo, so they still act in a Virgo way, both of them. They're in the same whole sign house, so they act in the same house, in the same sign, in a very similar way. But obviously, it is different from an actual conjunction. I would say this is better than an actual conjunction unless it's a cazimi, because Mercury is far away from the Sun maybe to have its own light in the morning. So this Mercury looks a bit like a morning star Mercury, which has its own interpretation. And if a planet has its own light and it's not always hidden under the light of the sun, it is considered more powerful, especially when it's making a heliacal rising, which Mercury here seems to be doing. I think if the sun's speed is a little bit faster than Mercury's, then in a couple of days I would say Mercury makes its heliacal rising. And I think this is what's happening here. Mercury has either made its heliacal rising or it's on its way to make its heliacal rising, so it's a very strong, powerful planet. So, this would be somebody with a pretty sharp, probably people would say a pretty sharp mind, and somebody who would be able to have and communicate their philosophy of life quite well, which is about the 9th house. Anyway, so that is a co-presence. The other aspect we're looking at is a sextile. A very nice sextile in this chart is happening between Venus and Mars. So Venus is in Libra. It is very powerful in the 10th whole sign house, in Libra in its own domicile, and Mars is at 16 degrees of Sagittarius, and it's making a sextile within a 1-degree orb. We're also looking at squares. We don't really have a very powerful square here. We have a square between the Sun and Mars, but it is within a 6-degree orb. And we look at trines. There's a very powerful trine between Mercury and Jupiter. Jupiter is in its fall in Capricorn, so even though it is the most powerful and most beneficial planet, a planet in its fall, it doesn't really have the capacity to provide its benefits as strongly. It doesn't have the capacity to signify what it wants to signify as well as in a sign other than its fall or depression, as it is called. So fall and depression are very difficult conditions for someone. And we also have an opposition, which is the last aspect class that Vettius Valens would look at. We have an opposition between the moon and Saturn. So it's very interesting. You see, this is just an aside. The parental inheritance that Prince Harry got is very heavy. The moon is opposite Saturn, obviously in a pretty wide, with a pretty wide orb, and that sun is squaring Mars, also relatively high, relatively wide orb, but still considered a square. Usually this would be interpreted in psychology, and psychological astrology is a very heavy, very difficult parental inheritance, very difficult relationship with the parents, as both of the luminaries are involved with malefic planets. So there's quite a lot of difficulty there, and currently we know that he does have a lot of issues with his family. He's sort of estranged from his family, but yeah. Putting that aside, if we keep going, so these are the same tables that appear for a natal chart reading. So the natal aspectarian, the chart positions, the element and mode distribution, and the polarity table. You don't really need to think about them for this chart calculation method. And then we get into the aspects that Valens would look at. So the first one is the Sun square Mars. What would Vettius Valens say about this? So it's strong by degree, right? It is sign based. It is also degree based, so it's a pretty strong square. It connects the 9th house and the 12th house, obviously from the ascendant. It says that it is harmful for the father and the native. It brings injuries, suffering, danger, conflict, damage to solar vitality, rank, or paternal matters. Which I think this seems to be true, at least from what we know from the press about him. This seems to have been the place. There's also the sign trine Jupiter, the sun in sextile Saturn, and then we move on to the moon and so on. It seems like we end things with Mercury. Valens, in the anthology book, he didn't really look at every possible aspect between planets. He probably mentioned some of the major ones, or maybe we don't have all the details for maybe some parts of the book were lost, but not all aspects are mentioned. So I added a section at the end called Other Aspects. For example, there is a trine between the sun and the moon, which is not really looked at, and I would understand why Valens would not look at this, because looking at aspects between the sun and the moon is not particularly helpful, because we do look at the lunar phase when the sun and the moon are in a trine. It is important to just consider the phase of the moon, right? So I think for his chart, for the chart of Harry, the moon is moving away from being full. So there was a full moon probably 4 or 5 days before he was born, when the moon was in Pisces at 20 something degrees, or 19 degrees of Pisces probably. If it was 4 days before, it would have been probably 18 degrees of Pisces or something like that, 18, 19 degrees. And the sun would have been at 18, 19 degrees of Virgo. So he was born a couple of days after a full moon. So the moon is losing its light now. This is interpreted in different ways. It is interpreted as a going inward, as a, it is associated with that period after somebody has been successful and they're distributing their knowledge and or their wealth, or they're giving back to the world after they have spent the time to improve and better themselves in a certain way. So that would be something to discuss probably with a person who has this kind of moon. So Valens would not look at the aspects between the sun and the moon. That makes sense. Also, aspects between the sun and Mercury I don't think they're mentioned. We do have a co-presence, but I don't think that's mentioned. Obviously, Mercury can only be so far away from the sun. I think it can only be about 27 degrees, if I'm not wrong, away from the sun, less than a sign away. So the only aspect it ever makes is a co-presence or a conjunction with the sun. It's almost always there, or they are just in separate signs and they're doing their own thing, which is not an aspect at all. A trine between the moon and Jupiter, that doesn't seem to be mentioned probably, or maybe I've missed it, but it doesn't seem to be mentioned. It's quite beneficial. And yeah, those are some of the things that you can see here. It's a pretty simple and straightforward calculation method. And if you want to know, without reading the anthology, if you kind of want to have an idea of what Vettius Valens would say about your chart 2,000 years ago, if he was your astrologer, how would he interpret the aspects in your chart, you can pretty much see that from this calculation method. And I hope it's going to be useful, and I hope it will make you want to explore the work of Vettius Valens more, because I think it's definitely something worth exploring if you are interested in astrology. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.